So, welcome everyone, and we are so excited that you guys are here for the Gift of Health Total Tuesday Wellness. As a parent, have you struggled feeding your kids, or have you felt that like it might be a battle to feed your kids? And today's guests are here to address this question and more, actually. And I'm so excited for today's session. So, for those of you who are meeting us for the very first time, I'm Dr. Shobha Rayapudi. I'm a board certified lifestyle medicine doctor and co founder of Gift of Health, where we actually help people struggling with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and other chronic conditions that we see nowadays to break free from those diseases, reduce their dependence on medications, and have more energy. And we do this Total Tuesday Wellness Chat every week. And we offer these sessions for free, and we bring in a variety, like we bring in experts from different fields who are passionate about lifestyle medicine. And today's guest, I'm really excited to introduce them to you. So today we have Dr. Mylene and Natalie. So like briefly, let me tell you. So let me introduce Dr. Mylene first. So Dr. Mylene, she's also a board certified lifestyle medicine doctor, and she has both personally and professionally experienced the transformative benefits of lifestyle medicine. And with her interest, she actually co-created Blue Life Treatment alongside with nutritional therapist Natalie Pelto, and I'm so excited that both of them are here today. And together they support medical professionals, families affected by autism and ADHD, and individuals seeking to live longer, healthier lives through the application of lifestyle medicine. So and there are so many wonderful things that both of these individuals have done. So one is Dr. Mylin also, I mean, she is passionate for integrating lifestyle based care into mainstream healthcare, and she has co-launched the Complete Lifestyle Medicine Intervention Program Ontario, which is known as Clip On, a collaborative project aimed at bringing comprehensive, publicly funded lifestyle interventions to patients living with chronic diseases. So, as I said, like we are in for an exciting session because both of them are here and they have a lot of experience actually dealing with people with autism, ADHD, and without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome both of them. So welcome, Mylene and Natalie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction and for having us on your platform. It's really an honor to be here, and we're really excited. I think this is going to be a great hour that we're going to spend together.
Yes.
I'm just going to share my screen.
Yeah, so go ahead. You should be able to share the screen.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there you go. We are able to see the screen.
There
Yes.
we go. You're seeing that, eh?
Yes, yeah.
Sounds good. So today's talk, we chose to name it Nurturing Brilliance, How Lifestyle Medicine Can Support Autism and ADHD. Gonna work. There you go. All right. So just a story to start. So Dee is very upset and feeling isolated and secluded. An older kid bullied him at school. A teacher witnessed them pushing each other, and they both got punished. He can't tell what happened or how he felt. He cannot advocate for himself, and he feels completely powerless and vulnerable over his predicament. It's not the first time Dee suffers from his inability to communicate. At a younger age, Dee had accidentally flushed his favorite Lego figurine. And he got really upset and he did a big tantrum, but he couldn't tell anybody what had happened and he couldn't get consoled. He, like just couldn't express himself any other way. And that was actually something that stuck with him. Dee's mom is very anxious. He's refusing most foods except for grilled cheese, chicken nuggets, and French fries, and he runs away. So eloping is a really big concern for a mom as well. And despite being almost 6 years old, he can speak, he can tell anyone his name, where he lives, who his parents are. He can say his phone number, the number of his street. So if he elopes and gets lost, there's not a lot that we can do. So that's very, very concerning and stressful. D is also very distant. He can't look or interact much with his family. And mom was told that they would have to learn to communicate through an iPad. And that was going to be their life. But it didn't start off that way. He had actually started speaking as a toddler. And then crickets. And so she knew her son was smart and was creative, but he couldn't share his gifts with the world. And so he was stuck in his shell. He was a prisoner within himself and he needed to be freed. And day in and day out, all she could think about was how she was going to free her son. So Emma is a 30-year-old ER physician, and she's been struggling with switching from one task to the next without forgetting something or mixing patient information, which is very problematic in a busy emergency department. She wrote on the wrong chart, almost discharged the wrong patient, and nurses constantly have to pick up the slack. Her charts pile up. She stays at work for hours after her shift is done. She's anxious, burnt out, and more coffee is just not fixing anything. As a child, she learned to compensate for her difficulty with focus. So compensation can be called masking. Through obtaining grace from teachers and other adults, through being a dedicated hard worker with a huge desire to help. She would stay after school to help on creative projects, to help clean up, would do extra credits with any task that was available. And she studied with friends whenever she could, started drinking coffee to do her homework with earplugs in high school. And she's hurt a couple of relationships actually because of emotional dysregulation, outbursts of anger, a little bit of mismatch between behaviors and social context, hard time reading people's faces and moods. And in her personal relationships, she also learned to try to earn extra credits so that people would be maybe a little bit more forgiving during those times of emotional outbursts or for her inattentiveness. Are you listening? It's kind of nice if people really like you off the bat. She relied heavily on being given lots of chances, but she never really felt good enough. She always felt like she needed to work really hard to be liked. So these scenarios are very classic, actually, of both children and adults that are on the spectrum. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what is happening, what is ADHD, what is autism spectrum disorder. We're going to be talking about lifestyle medicine to support these, but at the same time, we're also going to be advocating for those individuals that are struggling, because at Blue FRX, like what we really emphasize is that it's not that we either accept people or try to help them, it's that we do both. And in the neurodivergence world, there's often this dichotomy where people who are pro-acceptance want everything to be adapted for people who have neurodivergence, but are very resistant to doing something to help alleviate the symptoms because this is seen as not accepting somebody how they are. We believe that we can have both. We can both support people, help them thrive, and alleviate their symptoms and their struggle, but we can also cherish their gift and their differences and make the world as good a place for them to thrive as possible and as comforting as possible. So we help families through rebalancing health with the pillars of lifestyle medicine that we're going to be talking about, reframing our mindset and building resilience and leveraging the power of a supportive community. What is autism spectrum disorder? So it's a developmental condition that is affecting social communication and behavior. It's characterized by challenges in social interaction, restrictive and repetitive behaviors, and sensory sensitivities. And it's called a spectrum because there's a wide variety of symptoms, sometimes barely noticeable to very, very disruptive in someone's life. And so key diagnostic criteria, persistent challenges in social communication. Communication is very important in the diagnosis, and challenges in forming relationships. Restrictive and repetitive patterns of behavior. And sometimes parents will notice that the child is starting to line up toys in a specific way, or doing some hand movements repetitively, things like that. Is something that parents might notice. Insistence on sameness, difficulty with breaking patterns, breaking habits. Things need to be consistent and the same as much as possible. They can have a lot of sensory sensitivities with lights, with sounds, with textures. Sometimes it's seen as difficulty wearing certain types of clothes, the fabric, very sensitive. So again, in children, parents might see lack of eye contact or reduced social engagement, repetitive play patterns, delay in speech or unusual language. And in parents that are neurodivergent, when they start looking at themselves, because this is something that we see often, is that, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but often the child gets a diagnosis and then the parent starts discovering a lot more about themselves. So there can be challenges with social cues and masking, so lots of coping and compensation, like we mentioned earlier, hyper focus on interests, or discomfort in stimulating environments that have a lot of people, a lot of sound, a lot of noise or light, exhaustion from social interaction, so it's very demanding. And so it's really, again, important to remember that the brain is constantly forming and pruning connections, and we're always interacting with our environment, so there's always sensory input and we're always adapting. There can be symptoms that are more severe in some conditions and less in others. And in the same way, there can be symptoms that are more significant at certain periods of your life and less significant at others. So some people might say that they had ADHD as a child and now they don't, and it can be something that really fluctuates in different contexts. And the same way, it could be that things were a little bit easier as a child, and now all of a sudden, as an adult, maybe the sleep patterns changes, the stressors are different. Maybe you move to a new environment, your social connections are different, your diet changes, and symptoms can be more pronounced. So this is not something that is fully static, and it's important to understand that even within the regular realm of the condition, there's going to be expected changes. So what is ADHD? So it's a neurodevelopmental condition affecting attention and self-regulation. So inattention is an important component. So focusing, forgetfulness, disorganization. It can come with or without hyperactivity, which would be characterized with the constant movement and the restlessness and the impulsivity. Yeah. So for ADHD, the key criteria, again, inattention, difficulty sustaining attention, forgetfulness, disorganization, easily distracted by external stimuli. And in the hyperactivity, impulsivity, what is also important to mention is that there can be a lot of emotional dysregulation that comes with that as well. Here we go. So again, so in children, parents might notice constant movement, difficulty staying focused, not paying attention, trouble with time management, not being able to stay on a task for a prolonged period of time and not noticing where time goes. I think adults have a lot of that feeling too. Where did time go? And emotional outbursts, difficulty following instructions, difficulty transitioning. So a lot of the time we'll say that they're like a train. It takes a long time to start and it takes a long time to stop. And this can be actually really empowering for people to know, because let's say they're playing a game and you know that dinner time is going to come. You give a heads up, you know, in an hour, it's going to be dinner. In 30 minutes, it's going to be dinner. You only have 5 minutes. And because they have a hard time with you know, like the concept of time, then it's helpful too to have visual cues. So it can be like a timeline. You move a little car on the timeline. It can be like a clock that has like a different color. So there's like different visual cues, but to help them transition. In parents, it can be forgetting appointments, feeling scattered, restlessness, or a need for constant stimulation. So always, you know, either on social media or going somewhere, or just like cannot sit still, or have a not fully packed schedule. So people who tend to like overbook themselves, which I think is a lot of people. In some people, it's actually a symptom. Hyper focus on some hobbies or work. And again, like we said, emotional dysregulation. So if you're happy, you're way happy. And if you're angry, you're very angry. And you're kind of a roller coaster where, you know, if something, you complete lack of equanimity, if something happens during the day, you just completely, I don't want to say you're like a victim of what happens during the day, but like you just, your emotions completely follow what happens during the day, which can be very exhausting. So again, recognizing neurodivergence in parents is very important, because a lot of parents discover their own neurodivergence after the child has been diagnosed. And often they'll start having reflections about their lifelong struggle with focus, with sensory sensitivities, with organization, with relationships, how they had to adapt their lives to cope with the challenges without actually realizing that it was actually harder for them than it is for others. And this discovery can actually feel very empowering and provide explanations and clarity. And once we know what's happening, then it's easier to address. So knowledge is power, always. And so again, masking is very common in people who have neurodivergence. Makes them feel like they're not good enough, like they can't genuinely share who they are or be accepted for who they are. It makes people less likely to share their gifts with the world by fear of rejection, shaming, project failures, or other negative repercussions. And through lifestyle changes, mindset shifts, and a supportive community, we can transform health, create more fulfillment, reignite that inner fire that you can be anything, that you can do anything if you're really passionate about it, and generate unprecedented level of joys for the entire family. And so that's what we are about. So Food is medicine. I know you know this. I know it's not always that easy with kids. We're going to talk about it. Don't worry. Um, so there are key nutrients for neuroplasticity, for detoxification, and for recovery after lots of neuroinflammation. So food is a powerful tool to support ADHD and autism recovery. So as an example, we can focus on omega-3 fatty acids for brain function and neuroplasticity, found in lots of nuts and seeds, and that can also be found in some supplements. Zinc is an important element as well for neurotransmitter function and for gut health. So again, found in nuts and seeds, particularly high in pumpkin seeds, found in quinoa, in chickpeas. Iron can also be very important for cognitive focus and dopamine production. So greens, lentils, like in tofu, and then magnesium to calm the nervous system is also very important. And it's also interesting because some of these nutrients, it's not necessarily that you weren't eating enough to begin with, but sometimes, so let's say you're more anxious, it's possible that you're going to excrete more of your magnesium, and so that you might actually need to take in a little bit more until other practices support that anxiety. So like there are things like that with shifts in cortisol that can make your the way that you process some elements change a little bit. So food is detoxifying. I know that when we talk about detox, a lot of people think about like, you know, going on a 3-day retreat and only drinking green juices, and you know, it sounds very woo, but we actually have like detox pathways. And often when I'm talking to physicians, one of the examples that I'll use is Tylenol intoxication, and how we'll give N-acetylcysteine, so NAC, to help process that Tylenol by the liver. And so, so this is through the glutathione pathway. And so food naturally will support those detoxification pathways and help us process chemicals normally. So so sulfur compounds, for instance, will boost the liver. So broccoli, garlic, onions, so like the alliums. Antioxidants will be very powerful for the brain. So greens, even things like spirulina, asparagus, spinach. And then choline will support liver and memory, found in soybeans and seeds. And fiber will be very important also because it will bind directly some of those components. And it provides a healthy gut, and the lining of the gut will also prevent some of the toxins to enter the body. And so it's really important to have a healthy gut, and fiber is very important. I'm sure that anybody who follows the Rayapudi knows that fiber is important. So I won't dwell on it for too long. So taming neuroinflammation with food. So polyphenol rich foods full of antioxidants for gut-brain health. So vibrant fruits and veggies, very colorful. So berries, greens, berries, especially blueberries, are really good for this. Blackberries, strawberries, goji berries, but you don't have to go for something weird or exotic. Just dark leafy greens. You're like, how do I get my child to eat that? We'll talk about that too. And then nitrate-rich foods. So dietary nitrate, it's a gas. Food can help us produce more of it. It's anti-inflammatory, and it also improves blood flow, and it improves blood flow everywhere. So your heart, right? Like, I don't know if some of you have seen people who have chest pain and they take nitro, but some of the foods that we eat will actually provide some of that. And so again, I know we've talked about greens, darn greens, they show up again. Greens, eat your greens. Arugula is especially high in dietary nitrates, but all the greens, kale, spinach, beets, and especially beet juice is very high in dietary nitrates. Staying well hydrated is very, very important. We cannot overstate the importance of drinking plenty of water. And in kids, it can be a little bit challenging because they want to play all day, and stopping play in the middle of something really interesting to go and have a glass of water is not nearly as interesting. So they need maybe a little bit more prompting. And then again, feeding the gut microbiome, we talked about fiber, and then healthy complex carbohydrates are very important. So just a reminder to have fun. Just a reminder. Oh, it's because I'm sorry. I was doing it on the wrong computer. So probiotics also build beneficial bacteria. And again, we said that preserving a healthy gut lining is very important. And it's also important to know that the gut bacteria also are connected to the brain. The gut bacteria produce what we called SCFAs, so short chain fatty acids that go in the bloodstream and that help decrease inflammation and can act almost like hormones or neurotransmitters. So it's very important to have a healthy gut. They also promote a healthy immune system. And for anyone who has a child on the spectrum, it's very common that they will have either recurrent ear infections, recurrent chest infections. So they're very prone to having viral and bacterial infections. It's very important to support their immune system. So sauerkraut, plant-based yogurts, kefir, it's very helpful. So those are your probiotics, but you also have prebiotics. So prebiotics are your fiber and your complex carbohydrates and resistant starches that are going to go and feed those healthy bacteria. So most plant-based foods are feeding the gut bacteria. What's also important to notice is that if you eat fresh, raw foods, they have their own microbiome. And every time you eat them, you benefit from them both by getting that fiber and those resistant starches, but you're also benefiting because it's almost like taking in a probiotic. If you think about it, when you make sauerkraut, for instance, it's just going to be with salt and cabbage. The bacteria that are going to ferment that cabbage are already in there. They're just not in there in as high a quantity as after being, on the counter for a couple of weeks, but they're still there. And so this is true for every fresh fruits and vegetables that you're going to eat. And so even though we're never going to tell people not to eat cooked food, but eating as like a fair amount of fresh fruits and vegetables has the added benefit of feeding the microbiome even more in the form of probiotics. So remember to have fun with food, and this can look like decorating, like faces, like changing the shapes. Initially, for some kids, this might be a little more distressing and not as fun as we think it's going to be. And we're going to talk about that too when we talk about the resistors. But having fun can be a way to add more of these fruits and vegetables. So for instance, here the image that I show is a decoration with berries, which we know are really healthy. So sometimes if you look at a dish and you're like, oh, what could I add in there? Just, let your imagination guide you. Have fun with food. Mix it up. Bowls, soups, sauces, anything where you can add a little more. So you can blend it a couple extra seeds or sprinkle something on top. Any ways like this, you can get hemp seeds, you can get chia seeds. You can sprinkle maybe a little bit of nutritional yeast on a soup or a salad. So every time you think, oh, like, is there a little something, a little pinch of something that I can add to that dish? So mixing it up. And then blending can be very helpful. And so you can make smoothies, but you can also blend things in soups, in sauces like spaghetti sauce, and smoothies can also be frozen into ice cubes, Mr. Freeze, popsicles. So there's lots of different ways that we can pack food with nutrients based on what the child already likes. And the fun thing is, so we also blend in things in waffle batters and crepe batters. And often, so even when I talk to adults, and I'm sure you guys do that too, if I tell people that don't tolerate beans or lentils very well to just have a teaspoon a day, like, or a tablespoon, they look at me like, what, you want me to open a can and just have a tablespoon? But what we'll do instead is we'll tell them, if you have an entire pitcher of waffle batter or crepe batter, you can add a quarter of a cup. But then every crepe or every waffle is only going to have about a tablespoon, right? So this can be a way for people to start introducing different foods. And same thing with blending things into pizza sauce, into any tomato-based sauce for pasta. You can actually add, a half a cup or a quarter a cup of a new vegetable, and once it's blended, there's only going to be about a tablespoon per portion. So blenders are our best friends. So what do you dream you or your kids would eat? A lot of patients. So one of mine is just still over the moon that he's eating beets now. That was his thing. For some people, it's beets. For some people, it's any fruits or vegetables. That would be a miracle, right? But start thinking about, where would you like to go? And then we will create a plan. So not picky is, for us, we'll generally define that as a child or an adult that is already easily able to hit 30 to 50 plants per week. Because this is a number that ballpark has been associated with the best health outcomes. And because generally, if they're able to hit 30 or 50 plants per week, there's very little foods and textures that are very difficult. But if you find that textures are still a big issue, then this is going to be the goal that we're going to set for ourselves. So if they eat lots, but it's always, raw and crunchy, and nothing soft and mushy can be tolerated, or vice versa, then we're going to start working on those textures.
So, quick question here,
Yeah.
Miley. So, when you mention 30 to 40 different varieties of plants, the question is 30 to 50 different varieties of fruits and vegetables. So, or does it even include like grains or other things?
Yeah, it includes your fruits, your vegetables, your greens. It includes your whole grains. It includes nuts and seeds, beans, peas, and lentils.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
and the reason that we'll say that is, it's actually 30 to 50 different kinds of fiber and resistant starches, because the different bacterias in our gut are a little bit like us. They all have preferences in what they like to eat. But what's also important to know is that they perform different functions for us. Some of the bacteria in our gut will be in charge of producing some of our vitamins. Some of the bacteria in our gut will actually produce some enzymes that help us break down different kinds of food. And this is something that we see frequently in people that are intolerant to lactose. Some of them will develop a gut microbiome that does provide a certain amount of lactase. But our gut microbiome will also produce a fair amount of vitamin K, for instance. So we want a large diversity of gut bacteria, and in order to achieve this, we need to provide them with an all-you-can-eat buffet so that they can pick and choose what they're going to eat to make sure that it's to their liking.
So we have a comment here. Forget about the kids. When it comes to adults, they're having 30 to 50. So that raised a question. Wow, 30 to 50 different varieties of fiber. I know we don't think of that way, right? So like at least
true.
in a week, yeah.
And it will require some creativity. I like that comment. But so if you think if you're making I think smoothies can be a good way to start thinking about it. Let's say you make yourself a smoothie. So the smoothie that I'll make in the morning will generally have either kale or spinach, and then banana, and then either frozen mango or pineapple, and then berries. So it'll have blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, and then generally it'll also have cherries. So we're at 8. That's just your smoothie. Now, if you're very, very inspired, maybe you also add flax seeds, maybe you also add chia seeds. Now you have 10.
10, yes.
Right? That's just your smoothie. It's only up from there. Then, like for lunch, you make yourself a salad. If you use kale in your smoothie, maybe you use spinach for your salad. And then maybe you blend a different variety of nuts and seeds. Maybe you add some pecans because you really like this. Maybe you chop an apple. Maybe you add a little bit of sliced onions. I think I'm making myself hungry. And then like you whip up this like really nice maple syrup Dijon creamy dressing. And then, now you're at what, like 15? So, and then you just keep going.
Yes, yes. Amazing.
So this slide is actually the opposite of what we're talking about. And it's for people who hit very little, if maybe not even hardly any fiber in their diet, right? So picky eating and sensory eating. So picky eating is generally more associated with a child's preference and is very related to the exposure. So eating and feeding is actually a learned behavior. And so and evolution did a good job, because depending on where we live, we're going to be eating different things. So it's really important that our choices are not set from birth that humans only eat that one thing, because depending on where you are in different parts of the world, that one thing might not be available. And so parents, over time, will provide cues that something is safe for the child to eat. There's a misconception that, if you try 1, 2, 3 times, the child says no, then they just don't like it. It can take, I want to say, almost an unlimited amount of attempts in order for a child to accept a food as being safe. But picky eating is generally on that spectrum where the child has not yet established a safe relationship with the food. And so usually the severity is mild to moderate and improves maybe a little bit more quickly. The child is still growing well. There's not really significant nutritional deficiencies, and usually it does tend to improve with age, because as exposures keep on coming, these are being overcome. Sensory eating tends to be a little bit more severe, can be associated with nutritional deficiencies, and we're going to be talking about this, can persist if there's no intervention. And so don't worry, your kid will outgrow this. Might not actually be true. So you can just rely on that. and is usually caused by a sensory processing issue or an oversensitivity to different tastes and textures. That is not just because they haven't been exposed to it as much. ARFID, so avoidant restrictive feeding and food intake disorder, is generally much more severe and has a significant impact, can lead to stunted growth, can lead to more severe malnutrition. We've had, and this can actually manifest in both children and adults. We've had a child when I was doing clerkship who was actually diagnosed with scurvy. And so like you will see things that are much more significant based on significant avoidances of different classes of foods, different types of foods. And it can be related to fears of choking, experiences, fears related to the safety of food, but it's much more severe.
So a quick question here, Mylene. So my kid was eating well, like all the different types of fruits and everything as a kid, but once he turned 7 years old, suddenly he developed allergies to strawberries, and he he would make such a big deal that even if anybody is eating strawberries beside him, like he would just get off the table and not even sit there, and like it's a constant battle. And it was not like that earlier, but like we are surprised to find this, that he's developing. So what, under what category would that fit into, whether
So
the sensory eating?
it wouldn't really fit into any of these specific categories, because if that behavior was generalized to enough different foods that it was significantly compromising his health, then it would be ARFID.
Okay.
And it's not necessarily like picky or sensory eating, because he had an actual reaction to it, right? So I would say that it's almost like I don't want to say PTSD, because PTSD is an actual like diagnosis with that's more evolved, but like it's kind of like it is fear based. So
Okay.
you're right that ARFID is fear based, but if it's isolated to strawberries, then it's, as long as the other food groups and the other foods are eaten in fair amounts, then it's not going to limit his growth or his development.
Okay.
Yeah. So so I think like what's important to note is that for a child that has general like picky eating, exposure and positive reinforcement will help them outgrow this. For sensory eating, there's a little bit more strategy, and we're also going to dive into that. For ARFID, it will be a combination of the same strategies that we're going to be using for sensory eating, but it's going to involve a multidisciplinary team, because, depending on the nature and the amount of deficiency, then like some of these kids will require even inpatient care depending on the state they're in. So this is something that definitely needs a visit to the doctor, plus or minus an admission, again, depending on the severity. So nutritional deficiencies affect picky and sensory eating. So it's important to recognize that it's not necessarily, so again, when we talked about sensory eating, it's not just that they prefer something that is, sweeter or more salty or more processed. It's actually that it tastes different to them, and it can taste bad or unsafe for them. So zinc deficiencies, for instance, can make food taste more bitter. Especially vegetables and greens. Iron deficiencies can also cause pickup. So it can cause for children to lean towards things that are not food. These symptoms can be present sometimes in the absence of iron deficiency, but it's always something to look for if you see that your child is eating dirt or eating, things in the house that should not be eaten, to remember to check for deficiencies. Vitamin A and omega-3 can also affect texture processing and oral processing further, and magnesium deficiency as well. So heightened sensory responses can be to strong smells, textures, so it's not going to be limited to food, and it's very overwhelming for the child. It reinforces their rigidity because every time they try to venture out of their safety zone or comfort zone, they're reminded that it feels very uncomfortable and unsafe, and it can perpetuate the cycle of malnutrition because if food tastes bad because they're, let's say, zinc deficient, but they don't eat any nuts or seeds or beans or anything like that, and then they remain in their deficiency, then it makes it even worse. So this can be a cycle, and that's why it's important to address it as a strategy. And again, everything I talk about a lot of the time is more associated with children, but it's not only children that will struggle with these things. And these techniques can absolutely be used for older children and adults. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about strategies. So Natalie has talked a lot about a framework that she developed that is amazing. And so she developed sensory and picky eaters into 3 stages. So the resistor, the adventurer, and the negotiator. And so you'll have to correct me here.
Right.
This is my
So
exam.
actually, I mean, I think this is like before you guys jump to strategy. Like I have a question for Natalie. So, like, what inspired you to even help people with this? So, um, what I mean, I know, like, especially for me, like I was not much aware about ADHD or autism, like until like I saw a few of my friends experiencing that or struggling with that. So what inspired you to actually come into this area? So like, we would love to hear that from you.
I'm gonna spoil the end.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
you're going
spoil
to
the
spoil
end.
the
So,
end. Okay. So
yeah, no, that's okay. The first story that was told was actually mine. So my little boy at around 2 years old regressed into a non-speaking state, and he actually was non-speaking till he was 6. And I was also a healthcare worker back then. I worked in allied health, and I knew there was not in the system that we were in at the time a lot to support that. And so I started to research more, and I came into the world of the microbiome and nutrition, and I knew that it was not going to hurt him. And so we went into this journey. He's 15 now, and he no
wow.
longer has a diagnosis at all. And he was completely verbal and released from all of his care team at 7.5.
That is so amazing and inspiring because, like, we still, like, I still do see some people like same thing, just like similar to your story where the kids were speaking like, I mean, before 2, but all of a sudden that they noticed that they regressed, and they still struggle, and I mean, they try all like everything, and so they keep wondering like what is
What am I missing? Is always the word. What am I, that
yes.
phrase? Yes, and it's because a lot of it is very lifestyle based, and this is such a new addition to our healthcare model, where nutrition is looked at almost as a prevention but also treatment approach. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. I've been teaching about it for I guess close to a decade now, or almost a decade. And so, yes, my son is the child who only ate chicken fingers, nuggets, and French fries. And so I had to not just overcome his picky eating, but I was a picky eater and my husband was a picky eater.
Okay.
And so, yes, it works for adults. We've taste trained. I like to call the word taste training. That's a fancy way of saying it for adults, but we all eat now a full diversity of over 50 plants easily per week.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that story, Natalie. Yeah, yeah. And like I'll let you share the strategy. But before that, like one more quick question. So, Mylin, you were talking about like when people have iron deficiency, like you might find them like eating some other things. So, and that is something we see commonly as well. So I mean they might be eating their crayons or like whatever they come across, and the parent has literally, they have to be so vigilant. They're just afraid that they have to be 24/7 on the guard or make the house child proof, like where
Yep.
these things are not available. So that is so hard to do. So like what can the parent do?
So, it again, like the first thing, I would just make sure to rule out deficiencies. And even though we can get all of our nutrients from food, when like when the deficiency is severe, depending on the level, it's important to seek treatment. I've seen in ER, and this was I think like maybe pediatricians see this more often, but in some children we call them milk babies. And so children that drink way too much milk past an age where like they're supposed to have like fortified cereals and things like that will be severely iron deficient. So we had a child that had a hemoglobin in the 60s, and that was severely iron deficient. So it's definitely very important to diagnose like severe deficiencies. If you have a child that is a very picky eater and that is reaching for, all sorts of things to eat, and is eating like coins and dirt and all the things. And yes, I mean, in some cases it's purely behavioral, and it's still very distressing for the parents. The more that we restore the gut and the nutritional deficiencies, the more these behaviors do tend to go away. So that is something to remember, to not give up. And we don't believe that anything is set in stone. We've seen people improve from a wide variety of behavioral symptoms, emotional dysregulation. So whether it's pica, whether it's head banging, a lot of these behaviors, which like we tend to have this concept that something that is more behavioral or emotional needs to be resolved with psychotherapy or something like that, and that's something that looks more physical, like I don't know, if you're bruising or if you have a rash or whatever, now you have to go see like a physical doctor, but actually your lifestyle would impact your brain tremendously, and it needs to be both approaches actually need to be in place. So like, yes, absolutely to therapy, but definitely a lifestyle intervention and ensuring optimal physical health as well.
Okay.
There's only one health. And one of my friend is a psychotherapist, and she says nothing happens at the neck, the brain is an organ. It's a physical organ. There are chemical processes. There are enzymes. The same way there are neurotransmitters. So we still need, our nutrients, our building blocks, and all of this. So it's very important to remember that. All right. So when you're trying to feed a picky eater that we call the resistor, so that is usually a child that is very rigid, and that is not very open to exploring, to touching new foods, even just to play with it. They're very conservative, and usually will have, you know, a set number of foods that they feel safe around, and everything else is very hit and miss, mostly miss. So sometimes something that can be helpful in the approach, so first of all, to release a lot of expectations and to release pressure, because children will sense that, and they will get very uncomfortable, and the more stressed they are, the less they're going to want to adventure. So even if we think about ourselves, the more stressed we are, the less we're going to start new projects, the less we're going to want to, you know, go across the world to give a talk, but also the less we're going to start craving kale. You know, like if you're really stressed, like you want chips and crackers way more than you want your fruits and vegetables. So we cannot stress them out, which can be hard. Sometimes we're stressed out, but we just have to. It's called co-regulation. The more calm we are, the more calm they are. Creating a safe environment, and introducing changes very slowly. Sometimes it's just going to be, and again, all of this I've learned from Natalie. This is my exam, okay? So, so sometimes it starts with just even changing the shape of the food. So if they like pancakes, maybe usually they're round, maybe you make them round, smaller. Maybe you cut one side, you have a star shape, you know, cookie cutter. But you feed them the same food, but it breaks the routine just enough. But the food texture is the same, the taste is the same. So it's sometimes even just that is enough of a change for them, and then over time, we're going to be able to start changing the food itself. Nat also really likes to use something that she calls breakfast for dinner. And again, it's breaking the rigidity because they're used to their routine where they have the same thing for breakfast, the same thing for lunch, the same thing for dinner. It's a food that they already like and accept, that they already feel is fairly safe. And you don't even have to change the shape. So sometimes it's just going to be the time that's going to change a little bit. And so these things are going to be ways to start introducing changes in their routine without necessarily changing the taste or the texture of the food. So when starting to change the food itself, whether it's the color, the texture, or the taste, it's going to be very important to go very slowly. And so she usually recommends to go at an increment of about 10%. In the adventurer, this is when we're going to start doing this even more. So adventurers are a little bit more comfortable reaching out, interacting with new things. They won't necessarily eat all the things that you want, but they're starting to be a little bit more comfortable. Sometimes an initial step will even just be to like sit next to the food and not eat it. It's going to be to play with it. It's going to be to give a kiss to the apple or to the bell pepper. And then it can move on to even put it in your mouth, but spit it out. But a lot of the time,
yes, so how do you deal with, so like if the kid is with their electronic device 24/7, so let's say when you're trying to make them eat and the only time they would eat is when there is an electronic device in front of them.
And so I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but I guess we're probably starting to run out of time. But I know Natalie looks like she really wants to say.
Go ahead. No, like
but
any one of you can answer.
Limiting screens is very important.
And that's the hard thing. Parents find to do that. So
dinner time dinner time may not be the first place you do it.
I'm sorry?
Dinner time may not be the first place you eliminate.
Okay.
Screens are their own pillar, and they can completely change a child's behavior from what we see. But usually being more intentional with your screen time is going to be the most important thing at the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah.
There you go. So for the adventurer, there are two techniques that I was going to talk about. So food fading and food chaining. And when we do that, we go by 10% increments of introducing something new and taking away something that is, I don't want to say old, but not new. So if, let's say, you're blending kale in a spaghetti sauce. There's a spaghetti sauce, your child already eats it, or a pizza sauce, and your child already eats the pizza. You add maybe just a couple tablespoons in the blender. Make it in a way that doesn't really change the color, and the taste will change just a tiny little bit. And it's really hardly perceptible consciously, but it's actually having an impact on the taste buds. And so this is something that's going to be important. For things like pancakes and waffles, sometimes it's just to add a little bit and it starts giving a different color, but it's not necessarily changing the taste a whole lot. And so this is for the blending, and you can do this for blended soups, blended smoothies,
Mac and cheese,
mac
pizza,
and cheese, pizza,
chicken nuggets, French fries, you name it.
So you can change something in the batter. When food chaining, it can be something like going from a store-bought chicken nugget to sometimes what can happen is that to go from that to a cut up chicken nugget. And then once they're used, but it's the same chicken nugget, but you just chop it. And once they're used to that, you can start incorporating little bits and pieces of maybe a homemade one. And then you can start incorporate, and then you transition them to something that's maybe like not McDonald's. And then eventually maybe you transition to something that is like non-chicken nugget chicken, and then slowly you start fading in something like tofu, and maybe you press it, and you go on Sam Turnbull's blog, and you find a way to make it taste like chicken, even though her blog is called "It Doesn't Taste Like Chicken." But this is how you chain things slowly but surely. One thing blends into the other, and you're starting to make progress that way. And then the negotiator is a child that is able to accept new foods. Maybe they're starting to look a little bit more like classic picky eater that has preferences, definitely has preferences, but is a little bit more open to new foods. And then you can actually start negotiating a little bit more with them. Have a bite of this, and then you can have that, or you can have a bite of this if it's on on your favorite piece of bread, but like you start making deals a little bit more. Whereas if you have a resistor, like you can't even make a deal. It just doesn't, it's just not happening. So
and the deals, just so we're all clear, because I know this is controversial, can be made with reward charts that are event-based, and it doesn't always have to be food. And dessert, it doesn't mean dessert is what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a preferred food already on the plate for a food that is maybe a little less accepted.
Okay.
Any other questions so far?
Yeah, I think I asked what I see here. Yeah, so that's that's what I see so far.
Perfect. So again, breaking rigidity and expanding taste experience. Focus on progress over perfection, small wins, and focus on your wins, right? Don't live in the gap, live in the gains. Focus on the wins. Be patient and reduce fear and overwhelm. And supporting nutritional gaps. We've talked about that a lot as well. So sleep, and I just have a couple of slides. I knew that food was going to take most of the talk. So sleep really matters a whole lot. We've had people that came to us with a completely inverted sleep-wake cycle. Natalie does a lot of work with them on sleep as well. Can be exhausting for parents. Taking shifts, watching the child is on devices all night long, and awake all night and sleeping all day. So it's very important to slowly but surely transition that out. So sleep matters. Poor sleep worsens symptoms like hyperactivity and emotional dysregulation. It impairs learning and memory. Even like preverbal children will start saying words or syllables and babbles during their sleep because their brain is encoding. The brain detoxes and repairs at night. So we have the glymphatic system that detoxes the brain. And we even see this in older people. People who sleep better will have less tau protein that has been linked to Alzheimer's disease. So sleep is very important. It's I don't know if I can say it's the best medicine because food is medicine, exercise is medicine, sleep is
Yeah,
medicine.
and as you mentioned, Mylene, yes, sleep is a huge problem, especially with kids like that and parents. I mean, they face so many problems because, as you said, like the child is with electronics, and sometimes if the other parent is not cooperative, if just there is just single person who is taking care of the child, and if 24/7 if they have to take care of the child, it's so problematic, especially with the disturbed sleep schedule. So this, I mean, this is a huge problem that I see in a lot of people.
Absolutely, definitely. And you mentioned it as well that devices are a big deal for sleep. So and sleep is also linked to metabolism. And so cortisol, blood pressure, insulin resistance, and we talk about it in kids as well because these are diseases that we now see across all ages. But it also changes your immune function. So then again, just going back to like kids that are on the spectrum and have ADHD often have recurrent infections, and it's really important to support their immune system. And sleep can also impact sensory experiences. It can lead to hyperalgia, and it also impacts your cravings. And to my same examples about the kale salad when you're really stressed, nobody craves a kale salad at 3 a.m. Like, so if you're trying to get your kids to eat broccoli, they will need to sleep, because otherwise.
So what is the, I mean, like, what tip would you suggest? Because sometimes for the parent, for them to get rest, they just give the device so that at least they can have peaceful few hours of sleep. So what would you suggest for parents, like when they're finding the kid with so much sleep disturbance?
So it's like Natalie mentioned, she said like to be more intentional with the device. So I think that that's important to know when to use it and when to not use it. Usually we'll suggest 1 or 2 hours maximum, and these guidelines come from the Canadian Pediatric Society.
Pediatrics, yeah, but it's the opposite. It's just 2 hours that they're not on the electronic and rest 22 hours they're on the electronics.
It's definitely labor intensive, and I think that having social support is especially important. And I know that not everybody will have that in terms of like their own circle, but getting out there and finding ways to get respite is going to be very important, because otherwise, like Natalie said, it makes it even worse. And so we're actually like, we feel like we're buying ourselves time now, but we're actually eating away at our time later because the behavioral issues worsen. And again, we can yeah, so essentially the relationships get worse, the behavioral, the aggressivity can get worse. So it's definitely, their sleep can get worse. And when I say interaction, even so like, but not only just like speech and communication, but like eye contact, how much they want to interact, and not just with friends, but with their parents too. So getting more and more into their shell, having a hard time like following commands and understanding commands and things like that. So it's I mean, having a child that is able to understand and interact with you in the future is actually very helpful. And so
A lot is mindset. I
Mhm.
usually tell families who are a little resistant with the sleep and the devices, specifically for that situation, I say, what would it look like for you to be able to sleep in 5 days from now for 8 hours fully in a night? And they look at me and they said, well, that would be amazing. I said, well, that's how long it takes. You just have to reduce the screens from 5 p.m. on, and you will see a huge difference in your child's sleep.
Okay.
And knowing a timeline is helpful. Most children see those changes that quickly.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
Because
like,
blue light,
are you suggesting, so from 5 p.m. onwards, so let's say if you restrict the electronic time for the kid, and
it's there's a little more to it than that. I probably could do a whole talk on screens and sleep and reducing that. Circadian rhythm is important, but reducing the impacts of cortisol elevation before sleep is going to be one of the best things for the child's ability to calm down. We know that sleep starts when we wake up. So we do have to be intentional with screens throughout the day as to this is a device that promotes cortisol. It promotes stress, and nothing is actually very exciting after you've been on a screen, especially with what we're viewing today.
Yes,
So,
yes.
but at the beginning of sleep is the concern. And outside of, let's just say, behavior, I say that you need to provide that, you know, at least 2 to 4 hours for the ability to wind down.
Yeah, and as you said, this might be a session in itself, and like we will have a talk
We
on
have
this,
a
because this is a big challenge that many parents face, and they're looking for answers, especially with the screen toxicity. And this is the challenge you face. And you're right, Mylene, it gets worse and worse. The sleep pattern gets worse, the behavioral issues get worse, and they just feel that they are in deeper problems.
Absolutely, definitely. So we also have an entire challenge on screenless. When is, I think, is it usually in the fall?
I do 2 of them a year.
Okay.
There'll be one in the going into summer because there's more things to do, and then there's also one in the fall going into.
One in the fall. Okay, so let us know, so that we can let our community know.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
definitely. And then just to say, so movement matters, and it doesn't need to be something very fancy. And for children, movement is play, right? Playing outside is awesome. Playing inside is better than not playing. And physical activity will improve focus, emotional regulation, sensory integration. And again, talking about screens, well, screens disrupts just about every pillar, right? Like,
yes, it
because
does,
it
and
disrupts
there's
the
no
food,
movement,
the sleep,
especially.
the movement. Exactly. If children are in front of screens, and then movement also stimulates our production of brain-derived neurotropic factor, which BDNF is important for neuroplasticity. So if we want to actually change the brain, so nutrition is important, sleep is important, movement is also very important for that. It lowers cortisol and it promotes serotonin and oxytocin for relationship building, as well for stress regulation and all of that. So it's very, very important to have adequate amounts of movement. So for children, it's recommended at least an hour per day. And the more the better, within, you know, the capacity of the child. But it will actually help, not like it's not to tire them out, you know, like there's this like people who have more energy and they're told like go tire yourself out. Like there's actually, it's not just that you're calmer because you're tired, you're calmer because your chemistry has changed. And I think this is very important to know. And the effects will go far beyond just the time that kids are playing.
I do wish someone had told me when I had my son much younger that movement actually increases development in the brain. It gets bigger, it grows.
Yeah.
And I was unaware of that. But it's good. It's a simple way for parents to be like, oh, that's how important it is.
Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. Yeah, I
That's
guess like when I
good
say
to know.
people
Yeah,
don't really.
that's really
Good
good to
job.
know. Yeah, because nowadays we
Not that
hardly
anybody told
see,
me.
yeah, we hardly see kids playing. So yeah.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Definitely. And it also provides them with sensory stimulation. So it helps also with their sensory processing, with their motor development, and with their sensory sensitivities. So in terms of practical advice, again, like it can be incorporated in short bursts. It doesn't have to be 60 minutes in a row. And so it can be, you know, like scattered during the day whenever possible, and to be tailored to the interest of the kids. If they are very sensory, then it can be a good place to start progressively introducing things. Kids with ADHD tend to particularly like their sensory bins. If that's something that you want to build, you can have a bucket with you know, sand, a bucket with water, a bucket with Play-Doh, like, and they just play in that. Just slime is not friendly to every kind of household. So encourage outdoor play, because we know for vitamin D and but also because like even just looking at trees will decrease our cortisol, and being in nature can also boost the immune system. I know I talk about the immune system a lot, but it's kind of flu season around here. Boosting the immune system is really important. So trees produce phytoncides, which we inhale, which directly stimulate our immune system cells. So it's really important. It also boosts our microbiome because we're touching different surfaces that have different bacteria that are actually really helpful for us. And it's fun. We love nature. Get out there.
Yes.
So as much as possible. And then relationships. So we know that families that are struggling with autism and ADHD will have a tendency to isolate themselves because it's stressful, because of fear of judgment, because it's labor intensive. It can require a lot of preparation. It can be hard to watch the kids when they're out. So it's again something that needs a lot of intentionality. If there are places, so I know that for instance in Niagara they have programs. So if there are places when there's programs for supervised activities that are adapted, take advantage of that. But really any opportunity that you have to get out there and to connect with other families, with other children, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical, but to foster these relationships, for the kids to foster relationships, and for yourself as a parent to foster relationships, it's very important. And it's also important to notice that just because the kids don't necessarily interact the same way doesn't mean that they don't feel the benefits of being around other children and feeling that connection. And so sometimes we'll think that because they didn't reciprocate in the way that we thought they would, or that a neurotypical child would, that they're not actually having a good time, or that they're not actually appreciative of being around other kids, but that's not true. And it's also going to change their stress level. It can change their behaviors dramatically. And it can also change their sensory processing because they're, again, being exposed through play to different environments. And it fosters a sense of safety. If they have some children that they're around regularly, that becomes their safe person as well. And so this can foster some safety. And so So that was the spoiler alert that's been already spoiled, but so D is actually now 15 and is thriving and is Natalie's son. And I was that overwhelmed emergency physician that has also implemented a ton of changes in lifestyle through diet, stress, mindfulness, sleep schedule, toxicity, and food coloring and pre-workout drinks and all sorts of things that have changed in my diet since those days. And we have co-founded Blue Life RX to share this with the world. And so it's important. I know I talked a lot about building community. It's important to break the stereotypes, to get together. And it's important to find ways to support people that are neurodiverse, because just because the needs are a little bit different in terms of adaptation and transitions, it doesn't actually mean that we don't have the same health requirements. And so even though maybe it's a little bit more difficult to overcome picky eating, it's still just as important for their health and for our health to have access to a wide diversity of plant foods for our health. So it's really important to put that emphasis and to build community, because we heal in community. And so if you guys want more resources, you can get in touch with us, and we'll email you. We can email you more, pamphlets and flyers and one-pagers that we have already developed. We have lots of resources. You can email us at team@blueliferx.com. And so we were talking about challenges, the Screenless Challenge, but today, actually, the Feed the Good Bugs Challenge for the gut microbiome just started. And it's actually just a coincidence that we're talking today.
Oh, so it just started today?
It started today. So if you guys want to join, you can scan the QR code and join our Feed the Good Bug Challenge.
Amazing. So maybe like this one we can also put below our show notes so that people can take advantage of this. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this is amazing. Thank you so much, Mylene and Natalie. This was amazing. I know we went over time, and because I know even people they they have to go, so we will stop the discussion here. But for another time, we'll definitely have a discussion about sleep and also screen, because that's a big thing. Because as you guys said, that itself is a whole session in itself, and that will actually help many parents and many stressed out individuals. They're wondering how they can deal with this specific scenarios. So I really appreciate you guys coming in today and enlightening us and educating us and making us more aware about this thing. This has been amazing. So thank you so much for your time, and obviously we look forward to meeting you for another session. And here, so make sure you scan this QR code to have this challenge, and this is the best. So we are just putting in the chat as well. So in terms of, it's a team@blueliferx.com. So
Right.
that's the best email to get in touch with you guys, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So this is what we'll put in the chat here as well. Okay. So that's awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.